The old movie theater owner who always kept the last seat empty for me. The last seat in row F was always empty. A small paper sign read, "Reserved. Forever." It seemed. I asked why. The owner just smiled sadly. "That seat isn't mine to give away," she said. Then one rainy night, she looked right at me. "Sit there," she whispered. "It was always waiting for you." I didn't know the truth yet. Not even close. That seat held a secret that would change everything. My name is Maren Whitfield, and I moved to Hollow Creek, Vermont. 3 months after my younger sister Elise died in a car accident that shattered my family, I came for quiet, for distance from my mother's grief, and never expected an old movie theater called The Lyric to become the center of my new life. I found The Lyric by accident, drawn by a flickering marquee advertising a black and white film nobody in town seemed to care about anymore except me. The woman behind the ticket counter had paint-stained fingers, tired eyes, and a way of studying me that felt oddly familiar, though we had never met. "First time here?" she asked, sliding my ticket across worn brass. Her name tag read Dana Reyes, and something about her voice made me linger. I told her I'd just moved to town, and she nodded slowly, like my answer confirmed something she'd already suspected about me. She led me inside herself, past rows of cracked velvet seats, and stopped at row F, gesturing to every seat except the last one. "Anywhere but that one," she said simply, offering no explanation. And I was too polite that first night to ask why. I sat 2 seats away from the mysterious empty chair and watched the film alone, aware the whole time of Dana watching me from the projection booth. When the credits rolled, she was waiting by the exit, arms crossed, studying my face like she was memorizing something she couldn't quite place. "Come back Thursday," she said before I could thank her. "We're showing something you'll like." I hadn't told her what I liked at all. I went back that Thursday, and every Thursday after, though I couldn't yet explain why an empty theater seat pulled at me the way it did. Dana ran The Lyric alone, inheriting it from her aunt, and the town whispered that she buried herself in old films instead of living her own life. I started staying after screenings to help her sweep popcorn and fix the temperamental projector, telling myself it was simple loneliness, nothing more complicated than that. She talked about films the way some people talk about scripture, reverent and precise, and I found myself hanging on every word she said. One night I finally asked about the empty seat, and her hands went still on the broom, like I'd touched something fragile without meaning to. "Someone used to sit there," was all she offered, eyes distant. And I let the silence stand instead of pushing for more. I noticed she never looked directly at row F when she spoke, as if the seat itself demanded a kind of quiet respect from her. My mother called that week, her voice thin with grief, asking when I'd come home, and I found myself dreading the answer more than I expected. I hadn't told her about Dana yet. Hadn't told her much of anything since Elise died, since our house became a museum of silence and locked doors. Dana noticed the change in me after that call, and instead of asking questions, she simply handed me a bucket of popcorn and sat beside me. We watched the film in comfortable silence, her shoulder inches from mine, and for the first time since the funeral, I felt something loosen in my chest. "You remind me of someone," she said quietly during the credits, then caught herself, standing abruptly to change the reel before I could respond. I started noticing small things, how she always kept a second coffee brewing, how she flinched slightly whenever anyone mentioned September, how careful she was with me. The town's diner waitress, Carol, warned me lightly one morning that Dana kept to herself for a reason, though she wouldn't elaborate further than a knowing look. I didn't care about reasons yet. I only cared about the way Dana's laugh sounded when she forgot to guard it, low and startled and real. One evening, fixing a broken seat hinge together, our hands brushed, and neither of us pulled away as quickly as either of us should have. "I haven't let anyone help me with this place in years," she admitted, voice rough, like the confession cost her something she hadn't planned to spend. I told her about Elise then, the accident, The guilt I carried for not calling her back the night she died. The words left unsaid forever. Dana's face went pale in the dim light, and for a moment I thought she might cry, though she quickly turned away toward the projector instead. "I'm sorry," she said finally, voice tight. "I know what it's like to lose someone before you finish saying everything you needed to say." I didn't ask who she'd lost. Something in her posture told me the wound was still raw, still unfinished, still waiting for its own resolution. We started closing the theater together every night, lingering longer than necessary, finding reasons to stay in the flickering dark long after the last showing ended. She taught me to thread film reels, her hands guiding mine, close enough that I could smell rain and old popcorn butter on her sleeve. "You're a fast learner," she said, and I realized I was leaning into every compliment she gave me like a plant tilting toward light. One night, walking me to my car, she stopped under the marquee and asked if I'd ever loved someone the town told you not to love. I said no. Not yet. And something in her expression shifted, hopeful and terrified at once, before she said goodnight and disappeared inside too quickly. I lay awake that night replaying her question, understanding for the first time that whatever was growing between us had a name I wasn't ready to say. The following week, she canceled a screening to drive me 2 hours to my sister's grave, saying quietly that no one should visit grief alone. At the cemetery, she stood a respectful distance away. But when I broke down at Elise's headstone, she was suddenly there, holding me without a single word. "Thank you," I whispered into her shoulder. And she said nothing, just tightened her arms like she understood exactly what that grief weighed. On the drive home, she reached over and held my hand on the console, and neither of us mentioned it, though neither of us let go. Back at the Lyric that night, she poured 2 glasses of cheap wine and finally sat down beside me in the empty auditorium, closer than before. "I need to tell you something," she started, then stopped, shaking her head, saying instead, "Not yet. I'm not ready yet," and I didn't push. Instead, she leaned forward and kissed me softly, tentatively, like she expected me to pull away. And when I didn't, she exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for months. "I've wanted to do that since the night you walked in here," she admitted, forehead resting against mine, voice trembling with something like relief. I told her I felt it too. That strange pull from the very first Thursday, though I still didn't understand why it felt like recognition, not discovery. We began dating quietly, careful of Hollow Creek's sharp tongues, meeting mostly inside the safety of the darkened theater where no one else could see us. My mother, sensing distance in our calls, asked pointed questions about how I was spending my time, and I found myself deflecting more than I liked. Dana's ex-partner's name came up once, briefly, mentioned by Carol at the diner, a woman named Priya who'd left town years ago after a bitter split. I asked Dana about her gently, and she only said, "That's a different chapter," before changing the subject to the next week's film lineup. For a few golden weeks, everything felt simple: popcorn, old films, her hand finding mine in the dark, and Row F's empty seat quietly ignored. The peace didn't last. My mother arrived unannounced one Saturday, having heard from a nosy relative that I was spending too much time with that theater woman. She stood in the lobby of the Lyric, arms crossed. It was cold, and I felt 15 years old again, caught doing something shameful I hadn't named yet. "Is this why you moved here?" my mother asked, voice sharp, and I realized she somehow already knew, though I hadn't said a single word. Dana appeared from the projection booth, polite and composed, extending a hand my mother refused to shake, her disapproval radiating like winter through the lobby. "I don't want you near my daughter," my mother said flatly to Dana, and I watched something break quietly behind Dana's carefully controlled expression. Later that night, my mother told me she couldn't lose another daughter to this kind of life, and I realized, that she meant Elise too. Elise was gay, my mother said bitterly, the words falling like stones. And I don't know if that's why she pulled away from us before she died. I stood frozen, the ground shifting beneath me, because Elise had never told me, never told anyone. Or so I had always believed until that moment. Dana, overhearing part of this through the office door, went unnaturally still, her face draining of color, though I was too shaken to notice fully. That night I couldn't sleep, replaying every memory of Elise, searching for signs I'd missed, angry at myself for not being someone she trusted enough to tell. Dana came to my apartment near midnight, looking like she hadn't slept either, and said we needed to talk about something she'd been hiding from me. The empty seat, she began, hands shaking. It wasn't for a stranger. It was for someone who used to come here every week. Years ago. My stomach dropped before she even finished, some instinct already understanding what she was about to say before the words fully arrived. Her name was Elise, Dana said quietly, and the room seemed to tilt sideways beneath me. The coincidence too enormous to be coincidence at all. Elise had come to Hollow Creek for a summer program years earlier, before I ever knew this town existed, and had found refuge in the Lyric's Dark Rose. She used to sit in that seat every Thursday, Dana said, tears finally falling. She told me things she said she couldn't tell her own family. I felt betrayal and grief tangled together violently, furious that Dana had known my sister, had kept this from me through weeks of growing closeness. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I demanded, voice cracking. And Dana admitted she hadn't realized the connection until I mentioned Elise's name that first night at the cemetery. I didn't want to lose you before I understood what it meant, Dana said, and I hated how much that excuse still managed to make sense to me. That night, I left without another word, driving aimlessly through unfamiliar roads, unable to separate my love for Dana from my grief over what she'd hidden. For a week, I avoided the Lyric entirely, sitting instead in my empty apartment, staring at old photographs of Elise I hadn't looked at in months. My mother, strangely, softened during that week, admitting through tears that she regretted never asking Elise the right questions while there was still time. I don't want to make that mistake with you too, she said quietly. And for the first time since the funeral, we cried together instead of apart. I finally asked my mother directly whether she could accept me if I loved a woman, and her silence stretched long enough to hurt before she answered. I don't know yet, she admitted honestly, but I know I don't want to lose another daughter to my own stubbornness. Give me time. Meanwhile, Dana left messages I didn't answer, until one night she left a folder outside my door, letters Elise had written her, never sent. Reading them alone at 2 a.m., I finally understood my sister in a way I never had, her fear, her hope, her love for a life she never got to live openly. One letter mentioned me by name. I hope my sister finds someone who makes her feel as brave as this town has made me feel. Even quietly. I sat with that sentence for a long time, realizing Elise had somehow, impossibly, been hoping for exactly the kind of love I'd found in Dana. The next morning I went to the Lyric, letters in hand, and found Dana sitting alone in row F, in the seat she'd never once allowed anyone to take. I'm sorry, she said before I could speak. I should have told you the moment I realized. I was scared of losing what we were building. He sat beside her. Not in the seat, but close enough that our hands could find each other again. Fragile but reaching all the same. I'm still hurt, I admitted honestly. But I understand why you waited. I just need us to be honest from here forward. No more hidden things, she promised. And we sat together a long while. The empty seat between us no longer a secret but a shared, aching piece of memory. Just as things began mending, trouble arrived from another direction. A letter from the county announcing the Lyric faced closure over unresolved building code violations. Dana had been quietly draining her savings for years to keep the theater running, unwilling to sell the place that had once saved a grieving teenage girl named Elise. This theater is the only place some kids in this town ever felt safe, Dana said, Voice breaking. I can't just let it disappear. I threw myself into helping her find solutions, researching grants, historic preservation funds, anything that might buy time against the county's looming deadline. Then Priya reappeared, unexpectedly walking into the Lyric one afternoon, offering to invest enough money to save the theater, on the condition Dana consider reconciling with her. I watched Dana's face carefully as Priya spoke, searching for old feelings, terrified that history and money combined might pull her backward, away from me. I need time to think, Dana told Priya that day, and though she said it evenly, I felt something cold settle uncomfortably in my chest. That night, Dana admitted Priya's offer was tempting purely for practical reasons, the theater's survival, not her own unresolved feelings, but doubt still crept into me. Do you still love her? I asked directly, unable to hold the question back any longer, needing an honest answer more than a comforting one. No, Dana said firmly. But I'm terrified of watching this place die because I was too proud to accept help, even complicated help. I told her I understood the fear, but I couldn't watch her consider rebuilding a relationship with someone who'd once left her broken, not even for the theater. Priya returned the next day, pressing harder, reminding Dana of years shared together, and I felt my insecurities sharpen into something close to panic. I overheard part of their conversation from the lobby, Priya saying, "You always did care more about that place than about people." Cruelly, deliberately aimed. Dana's response was quiet but firm. That place saved people who had nowhere else to go, including me. Once, a long time ago. That night Dana finally told me her own history, a teenage runaway who'd found shelter in this very theater decades earlier, taken in by her late aunt. "This place isn't just business to me," she said, voice breaking. "It's the only reason I'm still alive to sit here with you tonight." Understanding that, I realized how impossible it would be for Dana to simply walk away from the Lyric, no matter what desperate offers appeared. Together we decided to refuse Priya's money and instead organize a community fundraiser, opening the theater's real history to the town for the very first time. My mother, hearing about the fundraiser, surprised me by offering to help with publicity, using skills from her old job at the local newspaper. It was the first time since Elise's death that my mother and I worked toward something together instead of drifting further into separate grief. Word spread through Hollow Creek about the theater's history as a quiet refuge, and slowly, unexpectedly, sympathy began replacing suspicion among some longtime residents. Carol from the diner organized a bake sale, the hardware store donated repair materials, even a few skeptical neighbors offered small, cautious contributions. Priya, seeing the community rally without her money, grew colder, eventually threatening to report additional code violations out of spite before finally leaving town for good. "Good riddance," Dana muttered, though I could see relief and old grief tangled together on her face as Priya's car disappeared down Main Street. With the immediate threat gone, we focused entirely on the fundraiser, transforming it into a special screening night honoring the theater's 40-year history. I found an old photograph of Elise among Dana's aunt's archives. Elise laughing outside the Lyric, more openly happy than I'd ever seen her at home. I showed my mother the photo, and she broke down completely, finally accepting a version of Elise she'd never been allowed to know while she was alive. "She looks happy here," my mother whispered, tracing the photo gently. "Happier than I ever saw her at our own dinner table. And that breaks my heart." That night, my mother asked if she could attend the fundraiser, wanting, she said, to finally see the place that had given her daughter peace. I agreed, though nervous about introducing her formally to Dana as more than just the theater owner, ready to finally claim what we truly were. The night of the fundraiser arrived, the marquee glowing bright, the whole town gathering to watch a restored print of the very first film ever shown there. My mother stood beside me in the lobby, quiet but present, watching as neighbors greeted Dana with warmth I hadn't expected from this cautious town. Dana took the small stage before the film began. Voice steady despite visible nerves. Ready finally to speak the truth she'd guarded for decades. "This theater saved my life once," she told the packed room. "And it's saved others too." Quietly. In ways this town never fully understood. She mentioned Elise by name, describing a shy teenager who'd found courage in that back row seat. And I watched my mother's hand tighten around mine. "That seat," Dana continued, gesturing toward row F, "has been empty for years. Reserved for someone I never expected to walk back through those doors." She looked directly at me then, in front of the entire town, and said, "I think it's time that seat finally belongs to someone again." My mother squeezed my hand tightly, and though she said nothing aloud, her expression carried something new, not full acceptance yet, but the beginning of it. After the speech, Dana walked toward me, took my hand in front of everyone, and led me to row F, sitting down beside the once forbidden seat. "Sit with me," she said softly, and this time I understood completely, not as a stranger anymore, but as someone chosen. Deliberately. Openly. Without hiding. The film began. Black and white light flickering across hundreds of watching faces, and for the first time, no one in that room looked away from us. After the screening, several neighbors approached quietly, some offering awkward but genuine apologies for old gossip, others simply nodding in newfound, unspoken respect. My mother found Dana afterward, standing stiffly for a long moment before finally saying, "Thank you for what you did for my daughters. Both of them." It wasn't a full embrace of everything, but it was enough. A door cracked open where before there had only been a locked, silent wall. Walking home that night, my mother admitted she still had much to learn, but promised to try. "For my sake and for Elise's memory. I don't want fear to cost me another daughter's happiness," she said. And I finally believe she meant every difficult word of that promise. The following weeks brought change faster than I expected. County inspectors, moved by community support, granted the lyric an extension to complete necessary repairs. Volunteers showed up on weekends, repainting the lobby, fixing seats, restoring the marquee's broken letters one by one under Dana's careful direction. I spent every free hour there too, no longer just as Dana's partner, but as someone genuinely invested in the theater's survival and its history. One afternoon, sorting through the archive room, we found more of Elise's old letters, revealing a friendship with Dana deeper than either of us had realized. She used to say she wanted her sister to find a place like this someday. Dana read aloud, voice trembling. "Somewhere safe enough to be fully herself." I cried reading that line, understanding finally that Elise, in her own quiet way, had somehow led me here long before either of us knew it. "Do you think she'd be happy for us?" asked. And Dana, without hesitation, said, "I think she'd say it took you long enough." We laughed through tears at that. A strange mixture of grief and joy that felt, for the first time, entirely survivable instead of unbearable. The county's final inspection approved the lyric for continued operation, and the whole town gathered again to celebrate its official reopening under new protections. Dana asked me, in front of everyone this time, whether I'd consider staying in Hollow Creek permanently, not just as a visitor passing through grief. "I already have," I told her, and the crowd's soft applause felt less like spectacle and more like quiet, genuine celebration of something real. My mother, present again, stood near the back this time, no longer at a defensive distance but close enough to belong to the moment. After the ceremony, she pulled me aside and admitted she'd started attending a support group for parents learning to understand their LGBTQ children better. "I should have done this for Elise," she said quietly, "but I can still do it for you. And maybe that matters too." I hugged her tightly, understanding that healing rarely arrives all at once, but sometimes comes slowly, through small, deliberate difficult choices made honestly. That night, Dana and I sat together in row F long after everyone else had gone home. The theater quiet except for our own soft conversation. I used to think this seat was a memorial, she admitted. A way of keeping Elise here. Now it feels more like a beginning. I asked if she regretted keeping it empty so long, and she shook her head, saying it had waited for exactly the right person all along. I think some things are worth waiting for, she said, echoing words Elise had apparently once told her during those quiet Thursday afternoons long ago. We decided together to keep a small plaque near the seat, honoring the lyric's history as a refuge, without turning private grief into public spectacle. My mother helped design the plaque's wording, insisting on including Elise's name, finally willing to speak her daughter's truth aloud, without shame or hesitation. The plaque read simply, "For everyone who needed a place to be seen. This seat remembers you." No names beyond that, though we both knew. Months passed, and the lyric became something more than a theater, a genuine gathering place, hosting community nights, local filmmakers, and quiet, safe conversations. Dana and I settled into a rhythm neither of us had expected to find so easily, built on honesty this time, not secrets or careful silences. My mother started visiting Hollow Creek regularly, sitting occasionally in row F herself, saying it helped her feel closer to the daughter she'd lost. One evening, she surprised us both by bringing an old photo album, filled with pictures of Elise she'd never shown anyone, ready finally to share them. "I think she'd want you to have these," she told me, and I understood it as an unspoken blessing extending toward Dana as well. Dana added a few photos to the theater's small archive wall, giving Elise a quiet, permanent presence among the history she'd helped shape without ever intending to. On the anniversary of Elise's death, instead of grieving alone, we gathered at the Lyric, screening her favorite film, surrounded by people who finally understood her. My mother sat in row F that night, holding my hand on one side and an old photograph on the other, finally, fully present with her grief. After the screening, she stood and spoke briefly, thanking the town for embracing a truth she'd once been too afraid to accept for her own daughter. "I'm proud of both my girls," she said, voice breaking. "One who taught me courage by living quietly, and one who taught me by living openly." The room fell silent, then erupted into gentle applause, and I realized how far we'd all traveled from that first cold meeting in the lobby. Dana squeezed my hand tightly through the applause, and I understood this moment belonged as much to Elise's memory as it did to our future. Life in Hollow Creek settled into something steady and warm, the theater thriving, the town slowly shedding old prejudices one honest conversation at a time. Carol from the diner started a monthly Lyric night special, and even the hardware store owner became one of the theater's most loyal regular patrons. Dana and I moved in together above the theater that winter, the old apartment smelling permanently of popcorn butter and faintly, comfortingly, of old film reels. My mother visited for the holidays, sitting comfortably in our small kitchen, asking genuine questions about our life together instead of avoiding the subject entirely. "Will you two ever get married?" she asked one evening, surprising us both. And Dana and I exchanged a glance neither of us had planned for yet. "Someday," Dana answered honestly, "when it feels right. Not rush. Not proving anything to anyone but ourselves." My mother nodded, satisfied with that answer. Spring arrived, and with it, an anniversary screening for the Lyric's reopening, drawing visitors from neighboring towns curious about the theater's now well-known story. A local journalist asked to interview Dana and me together, and for the first time, we agreed to share our story publicly, without hiding any part of it. The article ran with the headline about the seat that waited, and readers wrote in from across the state, sharing their own stories of quiet places that saved them. Dana received letters from strangers thanking her for keeping the Lyric alive, several mentioning their own hidden struggles with identity, family, and belonging. We started a small program offering free Thursday screenings for LGBTQ youth in the county, honoring both Elise's memory and Dana's own teenage history. My mother volunteered to help run it, greeting nervous teenagers at the door with a warmth she admitted she wished she'd offered her own daughter sooner. "It's not too late to be someone's safe person," she told me one evening, and I finally understood how completely she'd transformed since that first cold visit. One Thursday, a shy teenage girl sat alone in row F, and Dana quietly told her the seat's story. Watching relief spread slowly across the girl's face. Watching that moment from the projection booth, I felt Elise's presence more strongly than I had in months, not as grief, but as quiet, lasting purpose. Dana found me there afterward, wrapping her arms around me from behind, both of us watching the small theater fill again with people finding their own courage. "She'd be proud of this," Dana whispered, and I nodded, finally able to think of my sister with warmth instead of only unbearable loss. That summer, Dana proposed quietly, not with grand gestures, but sitting together in row F after closing, holding a small ring she'd kept hidden for weeks. "This seat brought us together," she said. "I can't think of anywhere else I'd rather ask you to stay with me for good." I said yes immediately, laughing through sudden tears. And somewhere in the projection booth, an old reel clicked softly, as though the theater itself approved. My mother cried when I called her with the news, saying only, "Elise would have loved this. I only wish she could have been there to see it." We planned a small wedding at the Lyric itself, in the lobby beneath the restored marquee, surrounded by the community that had slowly, imperfectly, learned to embrace us. Carol catered the reception personally, refusing payment, saying it was the least she could do for the two who saved this town's heart. My mother walked me partway down the makeshift aisle, stopping to hug Dana tightly before letting me go, a gesture that meant more than words ever could. We exchanged vows beneath the old chandelier, promising honesty above secrecy, courage above comfort, echoing lessons both of us had learned the hardest possible way. After the ceremony, we left one seat in row F symbolically empty during the reception, a quiet tribute to everyone who'd never gotten their own happy ending. Guests took turns sitting there briefly throughout the night, sharing memories of loved ones lost, turning grief into something communal instead of isolating. My mother sat there longest, holding Elise's old photograph, whispering something private before standing and rejoining the celebration with a lighter step than before. Late that night, after guests had gone, Dana and I sat together in row F one final time as an engaged couple turned newlyweds. "Thank you for sitting in this seat," she said softly, "even before you understood why it mattered. You gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever." I told her Elise had given us both that gift. Indirectly, imperfectly, across years and grief and coincidence too strange to be entirely accidental. We decided to permanently retire the seat from public use, replacing the old reserved sign with a small brass plate reading two names, side by side. The Lyric continued its Thursday youth nights for years afterward, becoming known statewide as a genuine haven for kids needing exactly what Dana once needed. My mother eventually became a regular volunteer herself, mentoring nervous teenagers with a gentleness she said she'd learned too late, but never stopped practicing. On quiet evenings, Dana and I still sat together in the auditorium after closing, watching old films, grateful for a life neither of us had expected to find. Sometimes, when the light hit row F just right, I swore I could still feel Elise there, watching over the theater she'd once called home. I used to think love had to announce itself loudly, but I learned it can also wait quietly, patiently, in an empty seat, for exactly the right person to arrive. Some seats, I've learned, aren't really empty at all, they're simply waiting, patiently, for someone brave enough to finally sit down and stay. Fendi.